Now we're going to talk about Microsoft Access, which is an RDBMS on the desktop. And Access only runs on Windows. So if you have a Mac version of Microsoft Office, it will not include Access. If you have a Windows version of Microsoft Office, then it may include Access depending on the version of Office that you have. Microsoft Access basically is a software tool that manages and controls all the aspects of the database itself. So the key components in Access are the tables. We've talked about tables before. We've got queries. These are ways, generally from an accounting perspective, accountants are typically going to use queries to ask questions about the data. And then the queries bring back the answer and we can analyze it. Other types of queries can actually be used to create tables, add data, change data, etc. But for the most part, application programs handle those activities now, so we don't really worry about them too much in queries themselves. The next thing in the database is forms. And forms, just like you might think about the online forms you use to pay for a purchase that you've made in an online store, a form is just a way to organize data entry. And you can also use forms to view existing data. Although they're not necessarily intended for viewing lots of data, if you want to zero in on one instance, a form can help organize how that instance is displayed so you can see it in logical groupings. The next thing are reports. So the reports are going to be more formal output-oriented views of data, lots of times listing a lot of data. Reports can be used to view large volumes of data in listing format, to see data in a table, multiple tables, or even data that was created from a query. Reports generally are created to help decision making. Another thing we can do in Access are pages. So pages basically are web-based forms that can then be deployed outside the database and used on a website to add data to the database. Macros are scripts that allow you to automate and repeat items that are going to happen every time you use the database or on demand. For instance, run a series of reports and distribute them to various users, set something up for data entry, open a series of forms that are used for a process. All those types of things can be done with macros. And then modules are basically programs that you can write that use VB code to perform activities, more in-depth activities in the database. So you can enhance Access to make it do more. You can change the way Access behaves on various activities. So modules allow you to fully customize and program the database to your purpose. And then of course in tables, relationships are a key component of defining the tables and how they're going to work with each other. In order to understand how we want to set Access's objects up, let's take a look at one of the models that we've worked with. So we've got inventory, Now let's consider the multiplicities we have for each of these association lines. And each of these association lines will become a relationship in the database itself. So let's think about this one here. For inventory, every sale is going to involve at least one item of inventory. So that's the leftmost number in that multiplicity. The asterisk means, well, each sale may sell an infinite or many items of inventory. If we take the other side of that relationship, so now we're going from inventory over towards sales. For this one, well, in inventory, we may create or buy some inventory and never sell it. Hopefully that never happens, but it's a possibility. So there may be inventory items that we never sell. Therefore, the minimum in that multiplicity would be 0. Each piece of inventory is only going to be sold once. Now let's take a look at the next relationship between the sale and the salesperson. Again, we'll start on the sales side this time. So now a salesperson, if they're not very good, may never sell anything. So we've got a 0, or they may make many sales, and therefore we have a many as the other side of the multiplicity. 0 to many sales. Over on the other side, a sale is always going to involve one and only one salesperson. All right, now let's drop down and look at the relationship between the sale and the customer. Each customer, in order for them to be classified as a customer in this model, has to participate in a sale. So each customer is going to participate in at least one sale. But a customer may be a repeat customer and participate in many sales. On the other hand, for each and every sale, the sale is going to involve one and only one customer. So hopefully we're driving home the nature of these multiplicities. But we'll continue and take a look at the cash receipt side. So now each cash receipt is going to be deposited once in the bank. Now it would be nice if I could take a cash receipt and deposit it multiple times, but I can only deposit one particular cash receipt, one check that I receive from my customer once in the bank. So once and only once. Now for that cash account, that bank account that I've got, well, I may sadly never have any cash receipts to deposit. So therefore there's a possibility for a minimum of 0, but hopefully we'll have many cash receipts that we deposit. So we have 0, a minimum of 0 and a maximum of many. Next, looking at the customer relationship, a customer is going to give us at least one cash receipt. We're designing this database optimistically. So we're going to receive at least one cash receipt from our customer and could eventually receive many cash receipts. An individual cash receipt is only going to be involved with one and only one customer. Finally, cash receipts to cashier. We may have some cashiers that customers never go and interact with, so there's a possibility that a cashier would never process a cash receipt, but most cashiers will probably process many cash receipts. On the other hand, an individual cash receipt is going to be processed by one and only one cashier. Now this is the way the business rules at this particular organization dictate that this database be set up, this data model, this class model be set up. Now it's possible that another organization may have different rules that dictate a different class model. So it's important to keep in mind these multiplicities actually provide some insight into the business rules in place at this organization. Finally, for the cash receipts, well, and again, we're going to optimistically say we're going to get at least one cash receipt. So for every cash receipt, we're going to relate it back to an individual sale. And we're going to relate it back to one and only one sale. So that's insight into the business rule. Each cash receipt can only be processed against one sale. Other companies may allow a customer to make a big giant payment that covers many different sales. And then finally, for each sale that is made, well, we'll have at least one cash receipt, but we could have many cash receipts. So think about someone who buys something, maybe makes a down payment on it and pays the rest later, or buys it on a monthly installment plan. So they may have many different payments. So now let's take a look at putting this into an actual database. Alright, so the first thing we want to do is open Microsoft Access, and when you open it for the first time, or anytime you open it without specifying a particular database, you'll get a screen that looks like this. You may have a different number of options available depending on how many templates or what options you chose when you installed it, but you can choose from one of these templates. Now we're going to build a brand new database, so we're going to just select blank desktop database. And when we do that, up pops a little box that allows us to choose which database name to use. So we're going to just call this SSS. And then you can also move it to different folders use. So to do that, you would click on the folder option and switch to whichever folder you'd like it to go to. Once you've got your folder and your file name set up the way you want, you just click create. And Microsoft creates a database file for you to go to work with. Now, depending on where you're coming from, or if you've got different options selected, you may have a little yellow warning, or if you downloaded a file from the internet, you may have a warning that says, hey, this content was downloaded from the internet, or are you sure you want to enable database activities? In general, you can click yes or enable to start working. Now Access starts us off in interactive build mode, so we're actually at a point where we can just start creating our database willy-nilly, but we're going to take a little bit more disciplined approach. We've already got the table. Let's go ahead and close that table, and we can see we've got a navigation bar over here that shows us all the objects in our Access database, and then we've got a work area over in this area. So let's go to create and then table, and you can see you get a little help tooltip every time that you hover over one of these icons. And we're going to, instead of going in this interactive view, change our view, which is up here in the left hand corner of the ribbon, to the design view. Now here's where we're actually going to start creating the rules, the attributes for our database tables. So we go to design view, and immediately it's going to ask us to name this table. So we'll call it customer. Click OK, and we now have a customer table, and we are now able to start identifying and naming the fields in our table. And remember, the field names in Access are the same as column names for your table, which also represent the attributes that you've defined in your class model. Now, it's nice to have a primary key, and you can see Access by default names our first field the primary key. ID is pretty generic, so we're actually going to call this customer number. All right, customer number. For some reason or another, you don't see that primary key next to the field you want to be your key. You just click anywhere in that field and press primary key, and that becomes your primary key for your table, the way Access works. Most database management systems have a tool similar to this for building database tables and organizing them and structuring them. So what you're doing here in Access is fully transferable to other databases, even large-scale enterprise databases that you might work with. Now you can name these fields. You see I gave it a pretty good long descriptive name. I think the fields can be up to 64 characters, but you want to also think about column headings and probably not use all 64 characters for all your named, or for all your field names. All right, so data type, well, auto number is one that's available. Basically, it's going to increment automatically every time you add a new record, but we're going to set up our own customer numbers, so we're going to make this a number. And you'll see down here, anytime I select a data type, additional information additional properties associated with that data type show up. a number of different ways. We're going to make it a number, and we'll make it a long integer. And we're going to give it a validation rule. And for our validation rule, we'll just tell it we want it to have X number of characters. So we'll say like, and then we'll just enter some pound signs, which represent how many characters we want. And I think we want 6. So let's do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And then we can actually write a text. So customer number must be 6 numbers. Now, since this is a primary key, Access is going to default to this being a required field, and it's going to be indexed with no duplicates allowed. So that makes sense because a primary key needs to uniquely identify a record. So once we're done, we can go to the datasheet view. It's going to verify that we want to save what we've done. We'll click yes, and now we've got a customer number that we can start working with. And even if we wanted to type in some data, we could say 1, 2, 3, 4, go down to the next record, and see it tells us customer number must be 6 numbers. So now I add 5, 6. Now I'm still building this table, so I'm just sort of testing it out. I don't want to keep this data. So to delete that record, I'll just click on this little box to the left of the line of the record, the line of data, and then press my delete key. It's going to verify that I want to delete the record. I click yes. And now I can go back to the design view. And we'll go ahead and add the rest of our fields and records. Okay, I've added my fields. And one other thing that is important is I can actually create input masks for my fields. So now, when I go to my datasheet view and I go to the zip code field, it's going to require me to enter that zip code using the 5-4 format. So I've got 5 characters. It automatically puts the dash in for me, and then 4 more. So if I go back to the design view, I can see how I did that. You can actually type in the mask just like you see it right there, or you can go to this little helper tool. It's going to make me save the table first, and you can see I've got some choices for these masks: phone numbers, social security, all very common types of masks, date masks and time masks. And then you can also edit the list and create your own field mask if you want. So zip code, you can see I've got an example there. I click next, and then I can tell it how to format it, what I want to do for someone who's about to type that field in, and you'll see we had underscores, and then you can try it and see what it's going to look like, and so forth. So now we've created all our tables. We've got our cash table, we've got our cash receipt table, we've got our customer table, which we've seen, we've got our employee table, we've got our inventory table, and we've got our sales table. Next, we need to create what we call the relationships. So these are going to be the equivalent of the associations we had in our class model. First thing we want to do is go ahead and close all the tabs. Relationships need to have, the relationships tool needs to have complete control of the database. So if we go to database tools, and then click relationships, we can start building the relationships between all these tables. Now, when you first open the relationships window, you may see a list of all your tables. If you don't, you can just click the show table tool, and then that brings up a list of your tables. You can actually incorporate queries into your relationships, but we're not going to do any of that just yet. So we can bring all our tables in. I'm bringing them in all at once. You can just add them one at a time. Either way is fine. Once you've got all the tables you want in your relationship window, then you close. And I like to resize these. These are pretty small tables, so it's not too hard to set them up so I can see everything in them. Now, just like in class models, it's very easy to use the REA approach in your Access database. So I'm going to take all my resources and put them over here. I'm going to take my customer and my employee over here. I'm going to take my sale and my cash receipt over here. And now I'm going to take the primary key from the tables I'm interested in and link them to the corresponding foreign key in the related table. So to start with, I'm going to go to Sale and go to Inventory, Sale field in the inventory table. And you can see here, a box pops up that verifies, are these the two fields that you want to link together? And I say yes. It's estimating I'm going to have a one-to-many relationship between these two tables. And I usually, and in our case, for all of our examples, we will click the Enforce Referential Integrity checkbox that says we're not going to allow this database to add a sale for an inventory item that doesn't exist, or vice versa. So we click Create, and now we have a relationship. We'll do the same thing with account. For the cash receipt, we're going to, the cash receipt will go into a bank account number. For the cash receipt will be related to a sale. The sale is going to be associated with an employee. The sale will also be associated with a customer. The cash receipt will be associated with an employee, and the cash receipt will be associated with a customer. Whoops, and I forgot to add my referential integrity. I can always go back by double-clicking on the line and add that. So I end up with a table or a relationship organization that looks a lot like our class model did. Once I've finished my relationships, I just click Close. Access verifies that I want to save changes to my relationships and even the layout of the relationship window. I'll click Yes, and now I can go back to work in my database. The next thing I want to do, I've got tables. I'm going to switch this to all objects. And what I'd like to do now is add some forms. Let's add one for the customer, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to Create, and then I've got a number of tools here for the form. One big recommendation I have is use the wizard. The wizards are going to help you get most of the way where you need to be with a database object, and then especially for forms and reports, and then you can finish it from there, and queries as well. All right, so I click Form Wizard, and it's going to verify that I want to use the customer table, yes. And then I can even specify which fields from that table I want in my form. I'll go ahead and select them all. That's what the double arrow does. I can add or subtract fields one at a time or all together. Next, I can tell it what kind of layout I want for the form. Columnar is pretty decent layout for forms where you're going to add data one at a time, so we'll stick with that. Next, we click Next, and it's going to ask what we want to name the form. So we'll call this, we've got a customer table, so in order not to confuse things, we'll call this customer form. And good database practice is going to have you creating standardized names. You're going to have standardized name formats for various types of objects. So in this case, form for forms. And then I can either go right straight to the form and start working with it, or I can continue to modify the design. So let's go ahead and take a look and see what happens there. Here, if I decide to modify the design, well, it comes up and you can see the form layout. It has automatically put all of that information in there for me, and I can resize each of these fields. My zip code is not going to take up that much space, so I'll make it a little bit more reasonably sized. And I can do the same thing for other fields: first name, last name, address. Might be long, so we'll go ahead and leave that nice and big. City, well, some city names can get pretty long. And then their email address, that could be pretty long as well. So we'll leave them. We can even make changes to the title. So we could say customer input form. And then resize this. And then resize this. Once we've made the changes we want, let's go, we can change to the form view, and now we've got a form that we can start working with. Customer input form, customer 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, customer zip, 38655, 1, 2, 3, 4, first name, last name, etc. And the forms are nice because I can type in Joe Smith, 123 Main Street, Oxford, and joe@smith.com. Now, you'll see down here I've got record 1 of 1. As soon as I hit tab, and I've just been tabbing from one field to the next, as soon as I hit tab out of joesmith.com, I go straight to another record, and you can see now I'm on record 2 of 2. Once I'm done entering, I can go back to my previous record. I can go to the very first record. I can go to the last record, which is my first record in this case, and I can also tell it to go start a new blank record. So the form is pretty nice and gives me the ability to start putting data in my system. So we'll go ahead and close this form and continue. And yes, we do want to save the changes. And now that we've closed the form, we are finished taking a quick tour of this database, and we'll move on from here.